The current state of bodybuilding seems to have the entire community split into two separate groups today. You have the hardcore and traditional bodybuilders. This includes pro, amateurs, and even non-competitors who live the bodybuilding lifestyle. Many are enhanced, but by no means are naturals excluded from this group. Most of the training and nutrition methods and ideologies in this group come from methods handed down from coaches and previous competitors, dating all the way back to the beginning of bodybuilding. Many of these methods work despite whether or not the bodybuilders know exactly why or how they do. They just know, if I follow this approach, I get this result. That's not to say they know the best way to do things, and many of the ideas or methods simply aren't the best option to get the job done, and some are flat out poor choices. Regardless of how effective these methods are, due to the fact that many people couldn't explain exactly how they work, the term bro science was coined. As a result, even if you've gotten amazing results in your bodybuilding career, and even if you're a coach that's helped thousands of others do the same, if your methods are based on trial and error, personal preference, ideas passed down from generations prior, or anything that isn't actual scientific literature, by today's standards, you're automatically thrown into the bro science category. The unwritten rule of this group is, if I've seen it work for someone before, it's worth doing. And if it works for me, that's what I do. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have just as large a group, but made up of less overall bodybuilding competitors, the majority of them being natural, but again, by no means are enhanced bodybuilders excluded from this group. This group is highly made up of average guys looking to build more muscle and burn fat, who live the bodybuilding lifestyle, but choose a more moderate approach and generally avoid the extremes of bodybuilding. Most of the methods and ideas of this group come from scientific studies. Generally, these are done on average individuals, and in some cases, even ones with no training experience. But in more recent times, the community has grown to where we've seen excellent studies done on highly trained individuals and even some competitive athletes. The unwritten rule of this group is, if any training or nutrition method is not backed with science or fall in line with the latest research, avoid it at all costs. The goal always being to seek the optimal approach. This is in fact the science-based community. Now, as someone who's been in the bodybuilding community for over 20 years, living the bodybuilding lifestyle, competing for a number of years, and helping both competitive bodybuilders and non-competitors do the same thing, if I can make a non-biased opinion on myself, I'd say I fall somewhere in the middle, which, by the way, you're not allowed to do on the internet in 2022. But regardless of where I claim to stand, you'll ultimately make up your own decision. However, I've gathered many of my own personal training and nutrition methods from both groups over the years. Science has shown over and over again that despite not necessarily being the only way to train, higher frequencies do have their place. And for most people, training body parts twice per week or more usually results in better progress than just one. High frequency being a method that I've been a proponent of for years. Science also has shown that training to failure is not necessary for muscle growth, and doing a moderate to higher volume with sets taken just shy of failure has been a method that has built my physique personally, and it's one that's been around way before the science-based community ever existed. The cool part is, science is now supporting some of the methods that have been around since the beginning of bodybuilding. So obviously, I think science has helped bodybuilding in many ways, but one way that I think it's hurt the bodybuilding industry in a major way is from this one simple question: is it optimal? Of course, on the surface, that sounds like a solid question, and one that can only help you build more muscle and burn more fat, but it could also have the opposite effect. It can send you down the rabbit hole of searching for perfection, and that's what I've seen happen to 90% of the science-based community. And let me spoil it for you. No matter how far you dig, you'll never find perfection in bodybuilding. The optimal training plan doesn't exist because there's no one universal way to train to get results. Rather, a set of principles and a range of training methods that get the job done. And let me tell you something, that range, it's actually much larger than you think. And as long as your training is set up in a way that allows you to execute it consistently, stimulate, recover, rest, and grow, you're getting most likely 98% of the results you will ever get. But so many people are caught up worrying about that 2% extra that they might discover in a new study that ultimately tells us very little that we don't already know. They end up missing the most important aspect of training: effort and consistency. And they end up spending more time researching training than actually going to the gym, getting results, and learning by first-hand experience rather than second-hand knowledge. So for those of you who are chasing optimal, you will find the closest thing to it by taking bits and pieces of training you find useful, discarding what doesn't apply to you, and ultimately following a system that you can execute over and over again. That's one area that I think the science-based community can learn from the bros. They have the ability to find what works good enough. Forget about all the noise and distractions that's likely preventing you from doing the most important thing. So even if your training is not optimal, I promise you that you can still break some of the rules and still get as good of results, if not better. I encourage you to think outside the box and understand that no matter what you find in a study, it's almost impossible to replicate it in real life scenarios. Not to mention, there's only one you and your unique situation and goals. You can search for years to find the magical routine that science shows will get you the best results, likely spinning your wheels in the process, but I bet you'll eventually always land in the same place you were headed to anyway, to a training and diet system that ultimately allows you the greatest consistency over time. And if you want the training methods that I have personally found over the years to allow for consistent progress using proven old school bodybuilding training methods, I highly recommend you check out my 5-day old school mass gain program in the description below. Like many others, maybe you'll run it as is consistently for months or years on end, making the best progress of your life. Or, like I mentioned, executing it over time and ultimately adding or changing what's needed to reach your goals. Regardless which plan you choose, execute it if it's working and block out all the useless noise. And as always, if you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.